Imagine yourself stepping back through time, beyond the bustling cities and grand castles, into a small medieval village nestled between dense forests and rolling hills. The air is thick with the scent of smoke and earth, mingled with the faint sounds of animals stirring at dawn. The village is a cluster of simple huts, thatched roofs, and muddy paths, surrounded by small plots of land struggling to yield food. Life here is much harder than you might imagine. There is no electricity, no running water, no medicine as we know it. You are among people who face constant hunger, cold, disease, and danger every single day. But you must survive, barely. Let's walk slowly through the village and learn the quiet, difficult art of survival in a world that does not forgive weakness. Your first priority is sheltered somewhere to protect yourself from rain, wind, cold, and wild animals. Most villagers live in small huts made from wattle and daub-woven sticks plastered with mud and straw, and topped with thick layers of thatch. These huts are drafty and dark. The floor is packed dirt, sometimes scattered with straw or rushes. Walls are cracked and weather-beaten, allowing wind and pests to enter. Roofs leak when the rain comes hard. Inside, the space is tiny. A single room serves as kitchen, bedroom, and workshop all at once. You share it with family, and often with animals like goats or chickens for warmth and food. There is no glass in the windows, only small holes or animal hides stretched tight. At night, the room fills with smoke from the fire pit, making breathing difficult. Yet this is your refuge from the cold and the dark. Food is scarce. Most villagers rely on farming barley, oats, rye, and a few vegetables. Meals are simple thin porridges, dark bread, watery stews with scraps of vegetables or salted meat. Famine is common. A bad harvest can mean weeks or months without enough to eat. Water comes from wells or nearby streams, must be carried long distances and stored carefully. Often, it is cloudy or contaminated, causing illness. Foraging in nearby woods for berries, nuts, or wild herbs is necessary, but risky, dangerous animals and bandits lurk beyond the village boundaries. In a medieval village, clothing is not fashion, it's survival. What you wear determines whether you freeze in the night, burn in the sun, or succumb to blisters and infection. You do not own many garments. Perhaps just one tunic, maybe two if you're lucky. It's made of coarse wool, dyed with earthy tones brown, gray, or dull green. Undergarments, if you have them, are made from rough linen, often patched and stiff from repeated washing in cold water and ash soap. There are no wardrobes. Clothing is hung on a peg near the hearth, or folded carefully in a wooden chest shared with the entire family. In the colder months, you wrap a heavy woolen cloak around your shoulders. It itches and smells faintly of lanolin, but it keeps the worst of the wind at bay. Children wear hand-me-downs, mended again and again, sleeves too long or too short, knees worn thin. As for shoes, if you have any, they are made from thick leather, often soaked through and cracked. Feet are frequently wrapped in cloth instead. Many peasants go barefoot, even in winter. Bathing is rare. You wash your hands and face using water from a wooden bucket. Soap is made at home, if at all rendered, from ashes and animal fat. Strong-smelling and harsh. Hair is combed with wooden tools. Lice and fleas are common companions, and sometimes ashes are rubbed into the scalp in hopes of driving them away. And yet, you carry on. You wrap yourself in what little you have and step outside to face the day. Your survival depends on work. From the moment the sun crests the horizon, your body must labor every hour, every day. If you are a farmer, you walk to the fields before first light. You guide a plow pulled by oxen, bending over the soil with frozen fingers and aching knees. You sow seeds, pull weeds, chase birds, and always hope that the next harvest will be better. If you are a woman, your work begins inside the hut. You stoke the fire, fetch water, grind grain by hand using a heavy stone quern, and prepare a meal for the family. Children carry kindling, gather eggs, sweep the hut, and help with weaving, spinning, or watching younger siblings. Even elders have chores, mending nets, sharpening tools, or teaching others. There is no such thing as rest. Even on Sundays, when you may go to church, the chores resume as soon as the service ends. You cannot afford idleness. To survive, you must always be doing something useful. At sunset, your back aches. Your feet are sore. Your stomach is half full at best. And still, tomorrow waits with the same list of labors. Surviving illness in a medieval village is like gambling with death. There are no hospitals, no trained doctors, nearby only, local healers, midwives, and wandering monks with herbal lore. A simple fever could kill you. A cut from a rusty tool could fester, turn black, and end your life within days. Toothaches could become deadly infections. Childbirth was perilous both for mother and child. When someone falls ill, the first remedy is rest, prayer, and herbs if any are available. Common plants like yarrow, sage, or garlic are used in teas or poultices. Leeches might be applied to balance the humors, or a local woman may whisper a charm over the sickbed, just in case. There are no bandages as you know them. Cloth scraps, often unwashed, are used to bind wounds. Water, fetched from the same stream where animals drink, is used to rinse injuries. Washing the body is rare. It is believed by many that bathing too often opens the skin to illness. Instead, people change straw bedding, air-out cloaks, or rub vinegar on their hands to clean them. To stay healthy, you eat what little vegetables you can grow. You avoid spoiled meat. You drink ale or weak wine instead of water because at least it's boiled, and you pray. A lot. Because in this world, a cough can become a death sentence. And your survival depends not just on strength, but on luck. Your life in a medieval village is not only shaped by hunger and sickness, but by threats that arrive without warning, often from outside the community. Bandits are a real danger. They lurk in the woods beyond the village, waiting for merchants, travelers, or even lonely farmers on the edge of their fields. They are desperate, armed, and often more ruthless than the village can handle. To protect yourself, you rely on the community. The villagers raise alarms when strangers appear. Dogs bark, bells ring, and everyone grabs whatever tool or stick might serve as a weapon. There is no professional police, just people, tired and poor, doing what they must. Fires are a constant fear. Every hut is made of wood, straw, and dried mud. With open hearths burning at all hours, a single spark can wipe out the village. There are no fire brigades, only buckets, a nearby well, and frantic hands. When the wind blows and the roof crackles, you pray it's not the night everything burns. Famine is slower, quieter, but just as deadly. A failed crop, too much rain, too little sun, a sudden frost. The food runs out. You stretch your grain as long as you can. You thin your stew to little more than hot water. You chew stale crusts while your stomach groans. You sell your last hen, your last cloth, just to eat another week. In hard years, neighbors disappear. Some flee to the towns. Some die quietly in their sleep. You keep going barely because there is no choice. To survive, you must stay alert, stay together, and accept that life here is never truly safe. In the medieval village, survival isn't just about food, shelter, or health. It's also about knowing your place. You are likely a serf or villain bound to the land. Not quite a slave, but certainly not free. You don't own the land, you till. It belongs to the Lord, who lives in a manor on a hill or behind stone walls nearby. The Lord rarely visits the village, but his bailiff does. He comes to collect your taxes, usually not in coins, but in grain, eggs, firewood, or days of labor. You owe him free labor each year, plowing his fields, repairing his roads, building his barns. If you refuse, you could lose your right to farm, or worse. Above the Lord is the noble class, above them the king, and above him, it is said, only God. You might have a Riva peasant chosen by other villagers who helps organize duties, settle disputes, and manage local business. Sometimes fair, sometimes corrupt. At the bottom, there are the truly desperate, landless laborers, beggars, and outlaws who drift from village to village. The church also holds power. The priest reminds you that suffering is noble, that obedience is godly, and that heaven will reward the poor. You give your tithe, a tenth of everything you grow, to the church, no matter how hungry you are. You have little voice, no vote, no protection in court unless your Lord speaks for you. But you do have neighbors, family, and custom, and that is often enough to hold the village together. To survive, you must bend where needed, stand where you can, and understand the invisible lines that rule your life. In the medieval village, the seasons do not merely change, they rule you. The sun, the wind, the rain, and the frost determine everything. What you eat, what you wear, when you wake, and how long you survive. There is no weather forecast, no warnings, no second chances. Spring is hope but also work. The frozen ground softens, and the fields must be plowed before they're ready. You rise before dawn to dig, sow, and tend. But spring can be cruel. Too much rain and the seeds rot. Too little and they never sprout. Late frosts kill new growth, and cold winds chill the bones. You pray that the gamble of planting pays off. Summer in summer, the days are long and the work is endless. You weed, water, mend tools, and repair fences. The heat is dry and suffocating. Your clothes are soaked through with sweat. Insects swarm. Your skin burns, peels, and blisters. You long for shade, but you cannot stop, because autumn waits. Autumn is harvest. The village becomes a machine, everyone gathering, storing, and preserving. It is the busiest time, but also the most hopeful. Full baskets, full sacks. For a few weeks, you eat well and sleep deeply. But you count every turnip, every loaf, because winter is coming. Winter is the test. Fires must be fed constantly. Animals must be kept alive or slaughtered for meat. Water freezes. Hands crack and bleed. If your stores were too small or your harvest failed, you go hungry, sometimes for days. The wind howls. The snow piles. You wait. You survive barely, and when the first buds appear again in spring, you start it all over. When your stomach is empty, your hands are cracked, and your nights are colder than the sky outside. You need something more than bread and fire. You need hope. You need meaning. In the medieval village, survival of the body is only half the struggle. The other half lives in the heart and mind. Faith. Every villager, no matter how poor, turns to faith. The church sits at the center of the village stone or timber, simple and small. Its bell rings through the mist to mark time. You kneel on hard benches, listening to the Latin words of the priest, even if you don't understand them. You believe in God, in saints, in heaven, and in hell. You believe your suffering has purpose. You light candles for lost relatives. You whisper prayers before sleep pleas for good weather, strong harvests, and safe childbirth. Every part of life is blessed or cursed. A stillborn child is tragedy. A recovery from illness is a miracle. To endure another year is a gift from above. Superstition faith lives beside superstition. You hang herbs near the door to ward off spirits. You avoid the woods at night, where fairies, witches, or ghosts might wander. You listen to old stories passed down from your grandmother, half true and half magic. You leave bread at the edge of the forest for peace. You scratch crosses on barn doors. You carry charms in your pocket. None of it is guaranteed, but it brings comfort. It helps you breathe, even when the cold won't let go. Storytelling. At night, when the chores are done and the wind presses against the walls, your family gathers near the hearth. The fire pops, the hut dims, and the stories begin. Tales of brave knights and foolish kings. Of beasts in the forest and miracles in faraway lands, of saints who walked on water, of neighbors who saw strange lights over the hill. These stories make the small hut feel bigger. They stretch the imagination past the muddy fields and smoky sky. They remind you that others have suffered and some have survived. And so you keep going through faith, through story, through belief in something more. In the medieval village, survival doesn't come from strength alone. It comes from skill, from knowing how to do the small, quiet things that keep you on those around you alive. You don't go to school, you don't learn from books. You learn by watching, by doing, by listening to your parents, your neighbors, the elders. Essential tools, you have only a few tools. Each one is precious. Each one is passed down, cared for, and never wasted. A wooden spade, worn smooth with years of digging. A sickle for harvesting grain, its blade rusted at the edge, but still sharp enough to bite. A hoe for loosening soil, clearing weeds, planting turnips. A cornstone to grind grain into flour. A needle and bone spindle for making and repairing clothes. A bucket for water and milk coffin, cracked but patched with care. If a tool breaks, you fix it. If it disappears, your work slows. And if you lose it altogether, you might not survive the season. Everyday skills, there are no specialists here. Everyone is expected to know a little of everything. You learn to mend clothing by firelight, sewing with thick thread and stiff fingers. Chop wood for the hearth, splitting logs by weight and instinct. Make bread, kneading the coarse dough, shaping flat loaves to bake near the fire. Thatch a roof, climbing on wobbly beams to patch leaks with straw bundles. Tend a sick goat, feed it mash, and rub balm on its leg. Find herbs like mugwort or nettle when someone falls ill. Children are taught these skills as soon as they can walk and carry. By 10 years old, they are working alongside adults, doing real labor. There is no childhood as you know, it's only smaller versions of grown-up tasks. Specialized knowledge, some villagers carry unique knowledge. The blacksmith knows how to shape metal, repair tools, and shoe animals. The weaver works the loom, creating cloth to trade. The midwife brings babies safely into the world and helps with illnesses. The herbalist can name a dozen plants that soothe fever or stop bleeding. The woodcutter knows which tree to fell and which to leave standing. You may not be one of them, but you learn from them. You trade with them, you depend on them. Because in this world, knowledge isn't just power. It is warmth. It is food. It is life. In your medieval village, coins are rare. Most villagers never see gold, and silver passes only through the hands of lords or merchants. You survive not with money, but with barterous silent system of trade and favors built on trust, need, and repetition. The local economy, everything you own has value, but that value is always relative. A sack of grain might buy you firewood. A dozen eggs could be exchanged for a clay mug or a spool of thread. A few hours of plowing a neighbor's field might earn you a meal or help with your roof in return. There are no receipts, no prices written in stone. Every deal is a quiet negotiation, sealed with a nod, a shared glance, and sometimes just hope. If someone cheats, the whole village knows by the end of the day. Reputation matters. A generous neighbor earns help when misfortune strikes. A selfish one is left to struggle alone. Fairs and markets every so often, a nearby town hosts a market fair. Villagers walk for miles through forests, over muddy roads, bringing what little they have to trade. They carry baskets of woven goods, live chickens, cheeses wrapped in cloth. There, they might see strange and wonderful things. Spices, silk, glass beads, even books. Most of these are too costly, but they remind you that a larger world exists beyond the hedgerows. You might sell wool or carved bowls. You might buy salt, iron nails, or a new knife, something you can't make at home. For a few hours, your life feels almost rich. Then you return to the village, clutching what you've earned. Tithes and obligations, but not all exchanges, are fair. You must give a tenth of your harvest to the church at tithe, expected without argument. You owe your lord rent, paid in grain, hens, labor, or whatever he demands that year. If times are bad and your stores are low, you borrow. From neighbors, from merchants, from the Lord himself. And debts in this world are slow and heavy weights. You survive by giving, taking, and trusting. By knowing who owes what and who remembers kindness. No matter how hard you work, how carefully you plan, how tightly you clutch your meager food stores, there are forces that can sweep through your medieval village like a shadow. War, famine, and plague. These are not rare events. They are part of life. They arrive uninvited, stay too long, and leave suffering in their wake. War, you don't start wars, but you suffer them. Lords feud. Kings quarrel. When armies march, they do not care who owns the fields they trample. Sometimes, foreign soldiers pass through. They steal your grain, slaughter your animals, and burn barns for firewood. They sleep in your hut, take your blankets, and leave you to shiver in the cold. Other times, your own lord calls you to fight to leave your family. Carry a spear and stand beside frightened men who have never seen battle. You march for days, sleep on wet ground, and fight for reasons you do not understand. Many don't return. The women, children, and elderly left behind must survive without you tending the fields. Defending the village, praying each night, you will return. Famine. Famine creeps slowly. It starts with a cold spring or a dry summer. The crops grow thin, the roots rot, the barley fails. At first, you ration, smaller portions, weaker broth. You grind the last sacks of grain. You butcher the last hen. Then you stretch flour with sawdust or acorns. You boil nettles. You chew bark. Children stop growing. Elders stop moving. Some lie down and simply don't get up. And still, the fields must be plowed. The fire must be fed. Life, somehow, goes on. Plague is the silent killer. It comes with the rats, with the fleas, with the stranger who coughed too close to the market stall. One day, someone in the village is feverish. The next, they are coughing blood. Then they are gone. It spreads fast. Too fast to bury the dead. Too fast to understand. You stay inside if you can. You burn herbs. You tie vinegar-soaked cloth over your nose. You pray, harder than ever before. Some survive, many do not. The village grows quieter. The huts, fewer. But the seasons go on, and so do you. In the end, survival in a medieval village was never about strength alone. It was about endurance. A slow, patient kind of resilience. A willingness to rise each day, no matter how heavy the sky or how empty the bowl. You lived among dirt and smoke, within thin walls and under leaking thatch. You stitched together a life from ashes and ashes, day after day. Your hands were cracked, your bones sore, your body tired, but still you moved. You feared war, but you planted. You feared famine, but you gathered. You feared sickness, but you prayed and you hoped, and you sang stories by firelight. The village survived not because it was strong, but because it was together. Neighbors shared bread, mothers taught daughters, fathers taught sons, old men told stories, midwives whispered prayers, and the children who played even in the mud and snore reminded everyone that life still pulsed beneath the hardship. Even now, centuries later, the echoes of your struggle remain. In the stone footpaths worn smooth by bare feet. In the crooked foundations of huts, long returned to the earth. In our stories, in our bones. To survive in a medieval village was to accept discomfort, live in uncertainty, and carry on anyway. Not with comfort, not with certainty, but with quiet strength. And that is how you survive. Barely, but beautifully. Though the medieval village life was harsh, tiring, and fragile, it left a mark that echoes through time. The villages were the roots from which modern towns and cities eventually grew. They shaped cultures, customs, and ways of living. Community and tradition, the sense of community. Forged by hardship and dependence, created traditions that lasted for centuries. Festivals, seasonal rituals, and stories passed from generation to generation, kept alive a connection to the land and to each other. Many of these customs are the basis for modern holidays and folk celebrations. Agriculture and technology. The medieval peasants' hard work in farming led to gradual improvements in agricultural tools and techniques like the heavy plow, crop rotation, and irrigation. These innovations slowly increased food production and supported population growth. The struggle for rights while most peasants were bound by feudal laws. Over time, they pushed back against oppression through revolts, negotiations, and alliances. This slow movement laid the groundwork for more equal societies and legal rights. What was lost, the simplicity of village life, came at a great cost. Millions suffered from malnutrition, disease, and violence. Many voices were never recorded. Countless lives ended without recognition. The medieval village was not a place of comfort or ease, but a place of survival, relentless and human. When we look back on the medieval village, it's easy to see only the hardship. But if we listen carefully, we hear the stories of endurance, community, and quiet courage. To survive in that world was to face constant challenges, yet never lose hope. It was to build lives out of scarcity, and to find meaning in every small task. It was to support one another in a world that often offered little mercy. And in that, there is something beautiful, something timeless. Your story, the story of millions before you, reminds us that even in the darkest times, humanity finds a way forward. Barely, but beautifully. Imagine living in a world where the concept of time as we know it today simply did not exist. No wristwatches, no ticking clocks on every wall, no smartphones buzzing with reminders. The rhythm of your life was set not by minutes or seconds, but by the rising and setting of the sun. the changing seasons, and the ringing of church bells. In the Middle Ages, everything took longer. Days seemed to stretch endlessly as you worked the fields or waited for news from afar. Weeks passed without a single letter arriving. Years blurred together, marked only by harvests and holy days. This was a world where patience was not just a virtue, but a necessity, where waiting was part of daily life, where time moved slowly because people had no choice. But why exactly did time feel so different? Why did even simple tasks seem to take forever? This script will take you on a slow journey into medieval time, how it was measured, experienced, and lived on, what it reveals about the people of that era. You'll discover a world paced not by technology, but by nature, religion, and human endurance. So sit back, relax, and prepare to step into a time when everything took forever. In today's world, we glance at clocks or check our phones dozens of times a day to know the exact time. In the Middle Ages, knowing the precise hour was far more difficult. Time was measured by natural signs and simple devices, and it was often imprecise. Sundials were one of the earliest tools to track time, using the sun's shadow to mark the passing hours. But sundials only worked on sunny days and only outdoors. In the often cloudy, rainy climate of much of Europe, sundials were limited. Water clocks, or clepsydras, measured time by the slow dripping of water from one container to another. They were useful indoors and during cloudy days, but required careful maintenance and were prone to inaccuracies. Monasteries and churches used bell ringing to mark the canonical hours, times for prayer throughout the day. These hours divided the day into periods like matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline. The sound of bells told villagers when it was time to stop work, pray, eat, or rest. But outside religious centers, few had access to such regular signals. Mechanical clocks began to appear in the late Middle Ages, often large and cumbersome, installed in towers. However, they were expensive and rare, and their accuracy was limited. For most people, time was a fluid concept, measured in parts of the day rather than exact hours. The lack of precise timekeeping meant daily life was ruled by light, sound, and routine, not by minutes or seconds. In the medieval village, your day was not carved into neat, numbered hours, but shaped by the natural rhythms of sunrise and sunset. Without clocks, villagers rose with the first light and rested once darkness fell. Work was dictated by daylight-long summer days, meant more labor. Short winter days forced early endings. People judged time by the sun's position in the sky, or by routine tasks like feeding animals or ringing church bells. Meals happened when hands and stomachs allowed, often just twice a day mid-morning and late afternoon. There was no rush, no appointment to keep, just a steady cycle of chores and rest. Waiting was normal. Waiting for the rain to stop before plowing. Waiting for bread to bake over a smoky fire. Waiting for a messenger to arrive, which could take weeks or months. This slow pace was not boredom, but necessitated a life measured by patience and endurance. The concept of time as money was centuries away. Instead, time was lived fully in moments, in the repetition of daily life, in the slow unfolding of seasons. In the Middle Ages, the calendar was much more than a way to mark days. It was the heartbeat of village life, guiding when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest, and when to celebrate. The Julian calendar the calendar used was the Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar over 1,000 years earlier. It divided the year into 12 months and accounted for leap years every 4 years. However, this system was slightly inaccurate, causing the calendar to drift slowly over centuries relative to the solar year. For most villagers, the exact date was less important than the season and festivals. Agricultural seasons farming dictated the rhythm of the year. Spring meant plowing and sowing seeds. Summer was tending crops and haymaking. Autumn was harvest time. And winter brought rest and preparation. Villagers learned to watch the skies and feel the soil to know when to begin each stage. A false start or early frost could ruin the crop, and with it, the year's survival. Religious festivals, Christian festivals, marked important points in the year. Many holidays aligned with older pagan celebrations, creating a rich tapestry of observances. Christmas celebrated the birth of Christ, a time of feasting amid winter's hardships. Easter marked resurrection and new life. Tied closely to the lunar calendar, its date changed yearly. Michaelmas, a harvest festival marking the end of the farming year and settling rents. Saints' Days. Numerous saints' feast days scattered through the year offered breaks from labor and occasions for fairs. These days were often the only times when villagers relaxed, socialized, and enjoyed music, dancing, and storytelling. The importance of church and community. Since most people were illiterate, the church calendar was communicated orally and visually through sermons, stained glass windows, and community events. This calendar connected people not just to time, but to meaning and faith. It provided a framework to endure hardship and celebrate hope. Slow passage of time. Without personal timekeeping devices. Villagers measured life by these recurring cycles, an endless pattern of work, worship, and waiting. Years passed slowly, marked not by birthdays on a calendar, but by harvests and festivals shared with neighbors. Time in the Middle Ages was not just a practical measure, it was a profound spiritual and philosophical concept. The way medieval people thought about time shaped how they lived, hoped, and feared. Linear and cyclical time. Many medieval thinkers believed in linear time of progression from the creation of the world through history toward an ultimate end. The Last Judgment. Time was a journey with a beginning and an end, guided by God's plan. At the same time, aspects of cyclical time persisted. Seasons returned. Festivals repeated. Life and death formed a circle. Agricultural cycles especially reinforced this cyclical understanding. This blend of linear and cyclical views created a unique sense of time. Human history marched forward toward salvation, but daily life repeated eternal rhythms. Eternity and salvation for medieval Christians, earthly time was transient, a brief moment compared to eternal life. The afterlife and salvation were the ultimate goals, and so much of daily life was framed by the hope or fear of what came after death. Time on earth was a test, a preparation for eternity. Suffering, patience, and devotion were virtues that shaped the soul for the eternal. Apocalyptic expectations. Medieval Europe was often gripped by fear of the end times. Plagues, wars, and natural disasters were seen as signs of impending apocalypse. This influenced how people perceived the passage of times, both urgent and uncertain. Scholarly views. Scholars like St. Augustine wrote extensively on time, famously pondering its nature as a creation of God. In Confessions, Augustine noted the mysterious way the present moment encompasses past and future, a concept still debated today. Medieval universities taught theology and philosophy that emphasized God's timelessness versus human temporality. Time in the Middle Ages was as much a spiritual reality as a practical one, constant reminder of human frailty and divine eternity. In our modern world, a message can travel around the globe in seconds. In the Middle Ages, it often took weeks or months for news to reach its destination, if it arrived at all. The speed of travel. Without paved roads or fast vehicles, medieval travel was slow and uncertain. Most journeys were on foot or horseback along dirt paths that became muddy or impassable in bad weather. Rivers and seas were used where possible, but boats depended on wind and tides. Travelers faced dangers from bandits, wild animals, and rough terrain. They had to stop often to rest and find food. Because of this, even short distances could take days. Messengers and couriers, nobles and kings relied on messengers to carry letters and commands. These messengers were often trusted riders who knew the routes and carried seals to prove their authority. Still, messages moved slowly, slowed by weather, poor roads, and political obstacles. Sometimes letters were lost or intercepted. The postal system was rudimentary at best, often a series of informal relays rather than a centralized service. Impact on politics and warfare. Slow communication affected politics and war decisions. A king might hear of a rebellion weeks after it began. Allies had to wait long periods before knowing each other's intentions. This delay could lead to misunderstandings, missed opportunities, or prolonged conflicts. Personal lives on a human level. Families waited anxiously for news from faraway relatives or for approval from distant lords. Marriages, inheritances, and disputes depended on letters and messengers who took their time. The slow pace of communication shaped every aspect of medieval life, reinforcing a world where patience and endurance were essential. In the medieval world, justice and administration moved at their own glacial pace, often frustratingly slow and unpredictable. The courts and legal process. Villagers who had disputes or crimes to report had to turn to local courts, often held by the Lord Steward or bailiff. Hearings were infrequent, sometimes occurring only a few times a year. Parties waited long months for a trial date. Gathering witnesses and evidence was difficult. Traveling to court could take days or weeks. Sometimes verdicts were based on oaths, ordeals, or local customs, rather than detailed investigations. Bureaucracy and record-keeping, administrative tasks like collecting taxes, recording land ownership, and issuing permits were slow. Records were handwritten on parchment, stored in manor houses or churches. Errors and delays were common. Officials might be absent or corrupt, adding to the confusion. Political delays, decisions from kings or nobles, could take months to implement due to slow communication. Appointments, grants of land, and other royal orders moved through layers of officials before reaching the village. Social impact for peasants. These delays meant long periods of uncertainty and stress. Justice was unpredictable. Help from authorities was rare and slow. Yet they endured, relying on community and tradition to manage conflicts. In the medieval village, waiting was not just a habit, but a fact of life, even in matters as serious as law and governance. In a world where daily life was hard and time moved slowly, social gatherings were precious. They broke the monotony and brought the village together, creating shared moments that marked the passage of time. Festivals, religious festivals, were the cornerstone of social life. Days like Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, and local saints' days were occasions for feasting, music, and dancing. Villagers took breaks from their endless chores to celebrate, worship, and enjoy community spirit. These festivals followed the church calendar, linking spiritual life to social life. Fairs and markets' annual fairs were major events that attracted traders, entertainers, and buyers from miles around. Villagers could buy goods unavailable locally: spices, cloth, tools, and sell their own produce or crafts. Markets happened weekly or monthly and were less grand but essential for daily needs. Both fairs and markets were times of excitement, commerce, and gossip. Weddings and funerals, life events like weddings and funerals, also structured social time. Weddings brought celebrations, dances, and feasts lasting days. Funerals were somber occasions, but important for community solidarity. The rhythm of rest and work outside these events. The village followed a slow rhythm of work and rest. Sundays and holy days were often the only rest days, when labor ceased and people gathered for mass and fellowship. These social rhythms gave medieval villagers a sense of belonging and a way to mark time beyond the slow turning of days and seasons. Though much of medieval life was slow and measured by natural cycles, the late Middle Ages saw technological innovations that began to alter the experience of time. Mechanical clocks. One of the most important inventions was the mechanical clock, which appeared in Europe in the 13th and 14th centuries. These early clocks were large, installed in church towers or town halls. Though primitive and not highly accurate by modern standards, they introduced the idea of measuring time in fixed hours rather than flexible periods. Clocks began to standardize timekeeping in towns, affecting work schedules, markets, and prayer times. The printing press. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 revolutionized the spread of information. Books and pamphlets could be produced more quickly and cheaply than handwritten manuscripts. This accelerated the dissemination of ideas and knowledge, changing how people perceived progress and historical time. Roads and canals. Improvements in transportation infrastructure. Better roads. Bridges and canals helped speed travel and trade. Merchants and messengers could move goods and news faster, shrinking the world. Impact on society. Though these innovations were gradual and limited at first, they began to break the slow rhythms of medieval life. Time became more measurable, more standardized, and eventually more pressured. The seeds were sown for the accelerating pace of the Renaissance and beyond. The Middle Ages were shaped by slow rhythms and natural cycles, while our modern world runs on clocks, schedules, and instant communication. Comparing the two reveals striking contrasts. The pace of life. Medieval life was paced by the sun, the seasons, and church bells. There were no alarm clocks, no deadlines, no traffic jams. People moved and worked at a natural, human pace, soft, slow, and repetitive, but tied closely to nature. Today, we measure time in precise units and push ourselves to do more, faster. Workdays are scheduled by the minute. Communication is instantaneous. The modern world races ahead, sometimes leaving us breathless. Perception of waiting in the Middle Ages was expected and accepted. Patience was a necessary skill. Letters took weeks, harvests took months, and news took years. Now, waiting is often seen as frustrating or wasted time. We expect immediate answers, fast deliveries, quick results. Technology and time, where medieval technology was limited, modern technology accelerates everything. Digital clocks, smartphones, and global networks compress time and space. But this speed comes at a cost. Stress, distraction, and the feeling that time slips away too fast. What we can learn by understanding medieval time, we can appreciate the value of slowing down. Patience, presence, and connection to natural cycles remain important. Sometimes, letting things take their time can be a gift, not a burden. Looking back at the Middle Ages, we see a world paced by nature, faith, and endurance. Time was not a commodity to be bought or sold, but a vast, slow river that carried people through hardship and hope. In that world, everything took forever not, because people were lazy or inefficient, but because the very fabric of life was different. Without clocks, instant communication, or fast travel, time stretched and folded around the rhythms of earth and spirit. Yet within this slow unfolding, medieval people found meaning through work, community, ritual, and faith. They learned patience as a survival skill and hope as a guiding light. Today, in our fast-paced instant world, remembering the medieval experience of time can be a balm. It reminds us to slow down, to be present, and to cherish the natural rhythms that sustain us. So next time you feel overwhelmed by the speed of life, think of the medieval village where every day was lived slowly, fully, and with quiet courage. Because sometimes, taking your time is exactly what you need. Thank you for joining this slow journey through medieval time. May it bring calm, curiosity, and a new appreciation for the ways we measure our days.